Tonight on Bridge City News, police are trying to determine the motive of the two BC teenagers connected in the slayings of 3 people in northern BC. The controversy surrounding the safe injection site continues in our city. Lethbridge MP Rachel Harder stopped by to let us know her thoughts. And another U.S. killing spree, this one taking place in Southern California.
Your nation, your province, your Southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Good evening. Thanks so much for joining us. The RCMP say it will be extremely difficult to determine the motive in the killings of 3 people in northern British Columbia. The bodies of 2 men suspected in the deaths were recovered yesterday near Gillum, Manitoba. Police believe the bodies are in fact those of Brian Schmigelski and Cam McLeod.
Manitoba RCMP has confirmed that the autopsies are being scheduled in Winnipeg to confirm their identities and to determine the cause of death. While we are still waiting for the definitive confirmation of the identities of the 2 deceased men, we believe that they are in fact the individuals that we were searching for. We still need to ensure that our investigative findings, whether it's statements, evidentiary timelines, physical or digital evidence, continues to confirm our investigative theory and eliminates any other possibilities or suspects. Until that is completed, we will not conclude this file. Regarding the motive, it's going to be extremely difficult for us to ascertain definitively what the motive was. Obviously, we will not have the opportunity to speak with these individuals. And again, the examination of the area where they were located today is still being dealt with and searched. So there may be additional items that could help in that regard, identifying a motive, etc., but we don't have that information yet.
Public Safety Minister Ralph Goodale applauded the RCMP in Manitoba for finding the bodies believed to be those of the 2 BC fugitives who were on the run.
This has been a very challenging, very complicated investigation and search. If you consider the territory that's involved here, from the original scenes of crime in northern British Columbia to the manhunt search area in northern Manitoba, that would be the equivalent of essentially traveling from London to Moscow. The announcements that have been made today will bring some sense of closure to the families of the victims that have been suffering from simply not knowing the full story, and they still would not know all of the full story, but hopefully this will help the families of the victims to achieve a sense of closure.
Lethbridge police have released a composite sketch of a man they're looking for in connection with the sexual assault of an 8-year-old boy at Henderson Lake. Police say the incident occurred on June 12th when the boy, after being offered candy, followed the male into the washroom and was then sexually assaulted. The suspect is described as an older male with a short gray hair, medium build, and was wearing khaki shorts and a red plaid shirt at the time of the assault. If you have any information that can help police, call 403-328-4444. Tensions have been ongoing between the Lethbridge community and Arches, the supervised safe consumption and injection site. Concerns range from needle debris to an increase in crime. Lethbridge MP Rachel Harder has begun to raise her voice as well on the very sensitive issue.
You have 2 sides to the argument. One would be those who would advocate for harm reduction approach and the supervised consumption site. And then the other side, which absolutely wants to do away with the consumption site and can be quite brash towards those individuals that are struggling with an addiction. And I think that both of these sides, there's unhealth in both. And so how do we meet or arrive at a place that is hopeful, a place that is compassionate, a place that will restore those who struggle with an addiction, a place that holds value for these individuals, that treats them with dignity and respect and honor and the worth with which they were born? And I think that approach is to say that detox and recovery has to be central, because we have to believe that these individuals are capable of living lives free of these addictions.
The opioid crisis continues to plague many cities across North America, including right here in Lethbridge. South of the border in San Francisco, federal prosecutors announced a crackdown in one 50-block area where open drug use has been tolerated for many years.
it's pretty bad, you know. They're just shooting up right in front of you. And, you know, I walk around with my mom, my dog, and it's kind of crazy. Like sometimes you just, you know, I'm afraid for my dog stepping on needles most of the times, you know. If I had children, I would never, you know, I don't think I would live here. Like a lot of people ask me, why would you open a business down here? It's, you know, not a desirable place. And I feel like, well, you know, if we're gonna make the neighborhood better, we need to not be afraid, and we need to come in and open new places, but we also need help, you know.
We are announcing today the formation of a federal initiative called the Federal Initiative for the Tenderloin, or FIT. And the FIT initiative will be focused on the prosecution of all appropriate federal criminal activity with a nexus to the Tenderloin neighborhood here in San Francisco.
3 more cannabis stores open in Lethbridge. They are Amsterdam Fog on 6th Street downtown, the Source Cannabis on 13th Street, and the Retail Cannabis Store on 24th Avenue. That brings the total number of licensed stores across the province to 256. According to the Alberta Gaming, Liquor and Cannabis Commission, however, apart from High River, there are no towns south of Highway 1 where a retailer is open. That includes areas like Pincher Creek, Coaldale, and Tabor. With less product shortages, the Commission is now issuing new licenses each and every week. Golf ball-sized hail nearly wiped out an entire vegetable garden, which is used to feed the needy in southwestern Alberta. The garden run by the Tabor Christian Reformed Church includes a lot more than just corn. As Loris Alexander explains, they offer a wide range of veggies to help supply local food banks.
Communities in southern Alberta faced the aftermath of a severe thunderstorm last Tuesday, including damaging the vegetable garden in Barnwell, a garden that provides fresh vegetables to local food banks.
So the sweet corn that comes out of Tabor, everybody goes, oh, Tabor corn, yay! And that would never hit anybody's food bank. And so this gives people opportunity to taste Tabor corn when they would probably never be able to afford it.
The garden grows more than the famous Tabor corn.
We not only grow the corn, we grow broccoli, cabbage, squash, cucumbers, raspberries, strawberries, carrots, beets, the whole variety of vegetables that you could pretty much pick up in your grocery store.
Vanderploe says last year saw an abundance of sweet corn and decided to cut back this year by less than half to avoid wasting any.
How much volume? Oh, last year we had like 10 tons of sweet corn and didn't know where to go with it fast enough because it all comes ripe at once. And so some of it never got harvested. We were looking forward to maybe 5 ton of corn instead, or 2.5 ton of corn instead, and be able to manage it and distribute it and not waste it.
Vanderploe says he and staff are heartbroken over the loss and work put into the garden. But he says despite the setback, plans for next year's harvest are underway. For Bridge City News, I'm Loris Alexander.
Will the fluoride debate ever go away? One group which has been quite vocal against fluoride believes the chemical is very harmful. One of the members of the Fluoride-Free Lethbridge group says the real issue is when municipal governments order it in drinking water, even if it's against a person's will.
One, it's poison, but I don't care if it's vitamin B or something you can prove is good. You still can't jam it down somebody's throat without their consent. I understand that when collectively a group of people want to kill coliforms in the water, but you don't need fluoride, right, to make the water potable. It's totally unnecessary. It's only because there's a supposed benefit of it being good for your teeth. But that is not established, even though they'll argue otherwise.
Fluoride-Free Lethbridge's stance says that if you believe fluoride works, just simply have your dentist apply it as opposed to having it in your drinking water. According to the Government of Alberta website, community water fluoridation is important for preventing tooth decay. A little piece of Hollywood is in Fort Macleod today. The filming of the new Ghostbusters movie kicked off and will continue for the next 11 days. Most of the filming of the $170 million blockbuster will take place in Calgary, but a single action scene will also be shot in Fort Macleod. Filming will be in 2 locations shutting down 2nd Avenue between the highways and the historic 24th Street. Unfortunately, there won't be any big-name stars in Fort Macleod since the scenes won't have actors, just a lot of stunt performers and professional drivers. Fort Macleod will represent a nondescript town in Oklahoma in the movie. Alberta Premier Jason Kenney marked 100 days in office yesterday. He said a blue ribbon panel report on the economy will be out in early September and stressed the state of finances could mean financial restraint. Unions and the opposition NDP said public sector pay and job cuts may be coming.
As you know, we ran on a platform to freeze spending at $48.9 billion for the full duration of this mandate and to maintain or increase spending in both healthcare and education. It has, however, become clear since we came to office that the fiscal situation of the province is much worse than the NDP told us. There has been, it's absolutely clear to me that they were trying to wish their way out of the deficit by over-projecting revenues. We are waiting for Dr. McKinnon's panel to tell us exactly how bad the situation is, and we will have to respond accordingly.
Canada's ambassador to the United States is stepping down. David McNaughton says he'll be leaving his post in Washington at the end of August to accept a job in the private sector. McNaughton played a major role in negotiating the new NAFTA deal. Kristen Hillman will become Canada's acting ambassador to the United States. She has served as deputy ambassador since 2017. There is more help on the way for Calgary's homeless. A new housing project is opening in the neighborhood of Bowness called the Clayton. It allows 30 single adults who are in need. The governments of Alberta and Canada provided just over $4 million of the $5.8 million for the project. Additional funding came through the Resolve campaign. The Government of Canada is rolling out its national housing strategy. It's an ambitious 10-year, $40 billion plan that will create around 100,000 new housing units across the country. The world has close to 8 billion people in it right now. But how many of us really know our neighbors? Ray Penning is the executive vice president with a Christian think tank, Cardis, and he says sometimes, without realizing it, we have a way of isolating ourselves from others.
I think some of the geography in terms of a lot of our suburbs where we have our garage doors, we drive inside with our door opener, you perhaps wave, but you don't talk to your neighbor. You don't have porches that are big enough to sit on. So we live isolated lives in which we all exist with our own families. And a lot of the interaction that we need to really be human is missing from our lives.
Watch the full interview with Ray Pennings from the Cardis discussing how Canadians are isolated and lonely. It's coming up in the second half of our show. A small plane crashed in the backyard of a home in eastern Pennsylvania earlier today, killing all 3 people on board. The single-engine plane went down in the Willow Grove community, which is a town located around 50 kilometers north of Pennsylvania. A man who was full of anger stabbed, slashed, and robbed his way across 2 Southern California cities in a rampage that killed 4 people and wounded 2 others. Authorities say the victims were just targeted and random.
The victims came home, found out their apartment had been burglarized, and they called the Garden Grove Police Department. We get a call at 4:23 p.m. about a robbery that took place at a bakery here in Garden Grove located at 13040 Chapman. In that robbery, a male, which is our suspect, driving a silver Mercedes, robbed the business and cash was taken. I don't have the cash loss at that time. Right after that robbery, our suspect returned back to the apartment complex behind me, and we believe our 2 victims in the apartment somehow confronted the suspect and an altercation occurred.
U.S. President Donald Trump traveled to El Paso, Texas to meet with victims and first responders of Saturday's mass shooting. His arrival, however, was accompanied by demonstrations over his anti-immigrant policies.
These hate-filled policies are enacted right here in our community every day. This attack and everyone before it has been an assault on our right to exist. Today, on a day when our community is still in shock, still in mourning, and still recovering from this white supremacist terrorist attack, because that's what it is. On a day when Latinx communities across the country are afraid that they may be next. Today of all days, we must hold the president accountable for the pattern of racism that has defined his administration.
Dozens of Walmart employees walked off the job yesterday afternoon at a facility in Northern California. The staff were protesting the retailer's gun policies.
Our goals are to get Walmart to stop the sale of all guns and ammunition, to get Walmart to publicly acknowledge that the role that selling guns and ammunition has played in the mass tragedies we've had. Additionally, to stop the Walmart wall pack from donating to any members of the NRA any members of Congress or politicians that have an A+ rating, an A or A+ rating from the NRA. as well as to really to also ban the carry, the open or concealed carry of weapons in Walmart stores or on Walmart property.
Unrelenting attacks, including a deadly car bomb that rocked Kabul yesterday by the Taliban, are undermining the credibility of negotiations to end the nearly 18-year-old war in Afghanistan. Now that's according to the country's ambassador to the United States.
The violence that we just learned about this morning is just heinous. It is just brutal and it's against humanity. There is no better way to characterize this but just an act of terrorism. And it could be partly because the Taliban are trying to earn further concessions in the negotiation table. So there's a tactical shift that they are really targeting centers of population. They might be thinking that they are demoralizing our security forces by attacking them, but we can assure you that that's not happening.
Another sunny and hot one today, but if you like cooler temperatures, good news. The mercury will be dropping. Complete weather details are on deck. Lots of sunshine and hot again today. Tonight, partly cloudy with a low near 12. Tomorrow, chance of thunder showers and a high near 26. Saturday, rain with a high of 19. Sunday, a good chance of showers again with a high near 22. Monday, a mixture of sun and cloud and a high of 21. Tuesday and Wednesday, overcast and a high near 24. Looking at the almanac, the average high for this time of year is 26 and an average low of 11. The highest temperature on this date was recorded in 1971 at 36 degrees, and the record low was 5 in 1988. Sunrise was at 6:11, sunset at 9:03. Looking at tomorrow's national forecast now, clearing in both Victoria and Vancouver and a high expected near 23. A chance of thunder showers in 22 is on tap for Calgary on Friday. A slight chance of showers in 18 for Edmonton. Mainly cloudy and 28 for Regina. Saskatoon will have a mixture of sun and cloud and a high near 26. Just a few clouds at 27 is on tap for Winnipeg tomorrow. Expect lots of sunshine and 25 in Toronto. Ottawa was under a severe thunderstorm watch today. Tomorrow, more thunder showers and a high near 23. Rain and 25 degrees for Montreal. In the Maritimes, Fredericton, New Brunswick should see some showers and 23. Halifax, Nova Scotia will also have rain and should get up to 24. Thunder showers and 26 is in the forecast for Charlottetown, PEI. And in St. John's, Newfoundland, expect an overcast day and a high near 20 degrees on Friday. Canadian Tire announced that it is moving into the party products business. The Toronto-based company is buying 65 Party City stores across Canada in a deal worth $174.4 million. It plans to add standalone stores and make Party City's products available across its Canadian Tire retail stores and online. The deal came as Canadian Tire announced second quarter net income was up 14% to $177.4 million. Exports of Canadian beef to Japan is continuing to gain ground. That's according to the Canadian Cattlemen's Association. The beef industry credits the new Trans-Pacific Partnership for their growing numbers. Stats Canada sales volumes is up 77% to just over 18,500 metric tons. That is worth $132 million compared with the same period last year. The association says Japan's decision in May to lift its over 30-month age restriction for beef exports should see those figures continue to climb. The new trade agreement went into effect at the end of last year. The International Air Transport Association says passenger traffic grew at a solid 5% in June compared with the same month last year. The airline industry group says June also saw a record load factor, a gauge of the percentage of seats filled per flight for the month at 84.4%. The lowest passenger growth was seen in North America, where carriers recorded increased demand of just 3.5%. The trade war between the United States and China continues. U.S. President Donald Trump has brought forth billions more in tariffs. Now, according to our foreign affairs expert Lisa Daftari, the trade war will continue if Beijing does not play by Trump's rules.
But the tariffs keep going up, which most people are not a fan of. But Donald Trump believes that this is the proverbial slap on the wrist that needs to be served to the Chinese government in order for them to come around. And what does that mean for them to come around? For them to play by at least somewhat fair rules that Donald Trump seems fair.
Catch the full interview with Lisa talking trade and how Russia is threatening to build nuclear missiles. That's coming up after business news. Now, here's a look at today's markets. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, a man who was full of anger stabbed, slashed, and robbed his way across 2 Southern California cities in a rampage that killed 4 people and wounded 2 others. Authorities say the victims were just targeted at random. Russia is threatening to develop nuclear missiles. Our foreign affairs expert Lisa Daftari will break down the reasons why next. But first, here's a look what's happening in and around your community.
Here's your Bridge City News community calendar. The Miners Days Historical Association of Colehurst is hosting its annual Miners Days on August 9th and 10th. On Friday from 6 to 11 p.m., enjoy a free family dance at the Colehurst Community Center with live entertainment by DNR. Then on Saturday, come for a delicious $2 pancake breakfast from 8 to 10 a.m., followed by a parade at 11, and other activities taking place at noon at the Miners Memorial Park, such as a show and shine, slip and slide, petting zoo, and so much more. So come out and celebrate Miners Days in Colehurst. The 22nd annual Joel Nicholas Arnoldson Memorial Charity Golf Tournament is taking place Friday, August 16th at Paradise Canyon Golf Resort. Green fees are $190 per person, with proceeds going toward the Green Acres Foundation, which provides quality and affordable housing for seniors. For more information and to register, call 403-328-1155. Do you or someone you love have a gambling problem? Is it causing chaos to your life and relationships? Gamblers Anonymous holds weekly meetings on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 408 13th Street North. For more information and meeting times, call 403-331-0822. And that's your Bridge City News community calendar.
North Korea has been flexing its military muscles, which is creating some new threats to the Western world. To talk more about it is our foreign affairs expert Lisa Daftari, joining me once again from Los Angeles. Lisa, Kim Jong-un says he has a new type of missile which should serve as a warning to the United States. Now, weren't we discussing not too long ago denuclearizing North Korea?
Yes, this doesn't sound like a partner in negotiations by any means. It's very interesting. It's very interesting because you have Kim Jong-un, who is a very mysterious character. This is what's been said about him. There's documentaries on his personality, which people even around him don't seem to understand. And on the one hand, very eager to negotiate with the United States, sit down with Donald Trump, have that photo op, have that handshake. And then when Donald Trump walks away, there's all these warnings and, as you said, flexing of the muscles. And, which one is the real Kim Jong-un and which one is the real representation of the situation with North Korea? Where do we stand? And how can we move forward with this? I mean, if you look, we have this situation in a lot of our foreign policy issues with China, with Iran, and North Korea. So hopefully we'll see some resolution on at least one, if not more, of these partners in negotiation, so to speak.
The stock markets have been in a little bit of turmoil recently with China devaluing its currency. Now, U.S. President Donald Trump is dismissing trade war fears and has slapped another, $4.4 billion duty on cabinet imports.
This is the most random headline about cabinet imports because we're actually redoing our kitchen and we chose not to go with a vendor that imports his cabinets from China. It couldn't have been more perfect. So when I saw that headline, I was very happy about choosing a different route. But that being said, many sectors of the economy here in the United States, all over the world, I'm sure, because of the imports that are coming through from China to the United States, and then they're dispersed in different ways, whether it's retail, wholesale, etc., and they're all being affected. And we just keep hearing from the White House that it's going to get worse before it gets better. But the tariffs keep going up, which most people are not a fan of. But Donald Trump believes that this is the proverbial slap on the wrist that needs to be served to the Chinese government in order for them to come around. And what does that mean for them to come around? For them to play by at least somewhat fair rules that Donald Trump seems fair, which is, not copying our intellectual property and not going back on their word and not going after cyber attacks and things of that nature. You think that's pretty fair, but China, I think, has a different plan in mind. We'll see.
How about Huawei? Is that a bit of an issue as well with the 5G network?
Absolutely. There have been many warnings served to Huawei, and well, the whole 5G phenomenon is something that most people are very excited to know more about, to hear more about, and Huawei being on the front lines of all of that. Donald Trump is cracking down, and when he means cracking down, he means cracking down. There's not going to be any exceptions made to that.
Tensions are rising as the U.S. sent an aircraft carrier through the disputed South China Sea amid tensions with Beijing. Lisa, China says it will not stand idly by if the U.S. puts missiles in the Asia-Pacific region.
Right, more exchange of threats from both sides, as we're seeing here. Besides for the tariffs and the tit for tat on the diplomatic front, we're seeing a tit for tat on the physical front, on the military side, where Donald Trump is beefing up our military presence. This is a show of leadership, regardless of whether you agree or not with how Donald Trump's handling China. Leadership in the sense that we show up. When we make a threat or when we stand up to an adversary, we show up. And that's exactly what's going on here. And we have that military presence near China for them to know they can't go on in business as usual, to bother their neighbors, to reign that part of the world the way that they have. They will have to play by international rules. And I think this is a way to, both on the tariff front and on the military front, attempt to curb the Chinese government.
Lisa, let's talk about the horrific mass shootings which took place, sadly, in the United States recently. El Paso, Texas, 20 people dead, another 9 people in Dayton, Ohio. Is this a forum or a conduit for people to attack Donald Trump right now and his administration?
Absolutely, and that's what's been going on from the Democrat candidates to many others and anti-gun organizations. Look, it's horrific. No, there's no two ways about it. It's horrific. We are mourning with the individuals, their families, those who are injured, those who had to witness this. There was a young 2-month-old baby whose 2 parents were protecting the baby, and the parents did not survive. And when you look at these stories, of course, these communities are going to be scarred for life. And when you look at the nonsense, the nonsensical mentalities that cause this type of attack, this is garbage, and it can't be put on one president, one speech, one book, one club, or anything like that as it's being done. This is simplifying a much larger issue. And look, we had these types of attacks under President Obama. We have them under President Trump. We'll have them under the next president, unfortunately. And until we look at it as, in a wholesale fashion, and see what kinds of, mindsets or violent upbringings or mental health issues. I mean, there's a whole long list. It can't be pinned on one president, one individual, one stance. It's unfortunate that this is what's going on. It looks awful to the international world. You have countries like Japan and Mexico and Venezuela and a whole list of others warning their citizens not to travel to the United States. And it's one thing if a country like Japan that's fairly safe warns its citizens. It's another when countries like Mexico and Venezuela, where it's sometimes in parts unsafe to just walk the streets, for them to warn. And it looks awful. It looks awful. And the media needs to take responsibility of making these false and gross generalizations across the board about shootings, mass shootings in the United States. The details and the reality of the situation are real enough. They're gross enough. They don't need to be exaggerated. There doesn't need to be a blame game that goes on. And the sooner we come around to getting off of this partisan horse, the sooner we can find some sort of solution or some sort of recourse for victims of these crimes.
Yeah, finding solutions instead of finger pointing is what it should be all about, definitely. The Taliban in Afghanistan denounced a presidential vote next month as a sham and threatened to attack election rallies as militants and the United States reported progress on a deal to end America's longest war.
Yeah, this is exactly what we want to hear from the people we entrusted to take over when we pull out of Afghanistan, right? More of the same. The Taliban cannot be trusted. They are a terror organization, and they will always be a terror organization. Now, for the United States to be negotiating, or at least believing that this is the group that can be entrusted with the future of Afghanistan, as has been done, the U.S. will be pulling out. This was the news last week, that the U.S. will be pulling out more troops by next year in a deal that they struck with the Taliban. Who strikes a deal with the Taliban? This is very, very, it's a precarious situation. It always has been in Afghanistan. Now, if you ask me what is the solution for the future of Afghanistan, that is a very difficult question to answer. While we're in bed with the Taliban, is there another way to move forward, a nation building for that country? Probably not. It doesn't leave them many options, and it leaves them very vulnerable to be taken over by these insurgencies. And that's exactly what happens when, if you look at Iraq, you look at Syria, you look at Afghanistan, when there is this political vulnerability, those are the groups that come in, swoop right in, and are able to take over and have influence. So when you have, at least perhaps this is the mentality or the thought behind this negotiation, is that when you have a group like the Taliban that at least is recognized by the United States, or at least will come to the table with the United States, then at least that's the group to strike a deal with. It's unfortunate, and mostly, Hal, you and I have spoken about this, it's the people of Afghanistan who are the victims of all of this back and forth, and they have not had a pretty past, they haven't had a pretty present, and the future looks dim as well.
The United States has heaped more sanctions on Venezuela. Now, the Trump administration says it is ready to target other countries for supporting Maduro. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, it looks like we're not getting any headway on getting Maduro out of office in Venezuela. With more sanctions and more sanctions, that country could be more economically crippled at this point. But now the United States would like to go after the countries who are pulling the puppet strings and allowing Maduro to stay in power. And that's a long list of our current adversaries, or those who are competing with us as well. So do we want to go up against Russia and North Korea and Iran to discuss what the future of Venezuela will be? Probably not. We have bigger fish to fry. But can we go after countries like Cuba? Yes, we can. And I think these threats that are made against those that are propping up the Maduro regime at least serve as a warning to smaller countries, and secondly, show the direction that the United States is taking. Obviously, the United States was a firm believer in toppling Maduro, in removing him from office, and having someone like a Guaido. If you remember him, he was the opposition leader who hasn't been in headlines recently. He's moved off to the side. He's had people around him that are very important, his right hand, his left hand, arrested, a lot of violence and threats made towards him and his family. So he's moved off to the side. But we know where the United States stands, and hopefully for a better future for the Venezuelan people.
Now let's stay with sanctions for just a moment here, Lisa. They appear to be taking a toll on Iran. Iran's president is warning that a war with Tehran would be the mother of all wars.
Yeah, more threats. Escalations keep occurring, and the rhetoric keeps getting stronger. But what will be the future of negotiations between Iran and the United States? As you said, the United States is applying this pressure campaign, and the pressure campaign involves heavy-duty sanctions that are quite targeted against both the sectors that matter to the regime, like weapons, like copper, like steel, like oil, like banking, and individuals who are integral to the regime, like their foreign minister, Zarif, and other members of the Revolutionary Guard. These are the individuals who are quite integral day in and day out to the Iranian regime, and we're hoping that this pressure campaign will put enough of a burden and enough pressure on the Iranians, the Iranian government, so that they will back down from their threats and their chest thumping. But that hasn't happened. We do know that the sanctions are working. We do know that they have been weakened. We know that they are really cornered. But what do they do when they're cornered? They start kicking even harder. And that means another oil tanker was seized this week. That means more exchange of very harsh rhetoric towards the United States. Unfortunately, this is going to probably also get worse before it gets any better, because the Iranians don't look like they're backing down anytime soon.
Russian President Vladimir Putin is threatening to develop nuclear missiles if the United States does. Could we see another Cold War developing here?
Well, yes, perhaps, but I don't think either country is in a position to want to spread itself so thin to go up against the other. But that being said, we are not in any nuclear treaty right now with the Russians. If you recall, Donald Trump withdrew from that treaty not too long ago, and we did not enter into a new one. So right now, the Russians can exchange these very harsh threats with the United States and say, well, if you withdrew from the treaty and you're going to go against the tenets of the treaty, well, we can do the same. And that's fair enough. It's a very delicate dance that the White House is doing currently with the Russians. We're just pretty much putting them off to the side with regards to any foreign policy, ignoring many of their actions that are going against the policies of the White House, but at the same time hoping that they are enough of a interest-aligned partner, definitely not an ally, in certain situations that they would respect at least the United States. We go up against each other in many cases as well, like in Syria, for example. But I think the Russians have enough on their plate, as does Donald Trump, to at least give each other this space and move forward. I think Donald Trump has always used treaties and negotiations as leverage, and I think he's holding this leverage over the Russians as well for now.
Concern from Kashmir is mounting as India is blocking phone and internet service. Lisa, that's the story here from the Washington Post. And we know the history between Pakistan and India, and it's not a good history.
No, and this is such a big story, and it's not being covered as it should. Maybe perhaps people don't understand the history, as you said, between Pakistan and India over Kashmir. What is Kashmir? What is it? Kashmir is this small Himalayan island. It's very small, it would appear to be an insignificant piece of real estate to most, but India and Pakistan seem to be fighting over it for many, many, many years now. The lines were drawn. Pakistan wasn't happy with the advantage that India had in Kashmir, and they sat down again and they drew new lines. And in the new lines, India maintained a majority of that Kashmir and drew up a sort of solution that would make both sides somewhat happy, where Kashmir would be partially autonomous and partially not. They'd be partially under India and partially not. And now with what they perceive as somewhat of an uprising, and again, I'll say this has been beneath the surface for a long time now. India has felt that there's been these insurgencies that want to basically get the Indian influence off of them and to be fully autonomous. And when they feel that these protests have gotten worse and these insurgencies have gotten stronger and building more momentum, India is now cracking down. And that's what we're seeing since the beginning of the month for about a week now. Now, the Kashmiris want full autonomy. The Pakistanis don't want the Indians to have more power. The Indians want full power because they're losing power. And that's where we have it now. India has pulled a lot of their basically their perks or their advantages, whatever control was in their hands, including internet or phone lines. So they're basically punishing them so that they play along. And that's where we have it up to now. But you have a lot of other foreign players getting involved. You have China putting in their 2 cents, Pakistan, of course, putting in their 2 cents, and of course, India trying to really toe the line here and put this pressure on Kashmir to straighten out.
Our foreign affairs expert, Lisa Daftari, joining me once again from Los Angeles. Thanks, Lisa.
My pleasure.
In a world that is more populated and crowded than ever before, it seems that more and more people are experiencing isolation and loneliness. Joining me now via Skype from Hamilton, Ontario is Ray Pennings, the Executive VP of the Christian think tank Cardis. Ray, welcome back to BCN.
Thank you very much for having me.
Now, Ray, Cardis conducted a survey in partnership with the Angus Reid Institute, and it discovered that 23% of Canadians suffer from extreme social isolation and loneliness. Now, that's close to 1 out of every 4 people. Did those numbers kind of surprise you?
Not really. The trend has been studied for a few years. The problem in Great Britain is such that they actually created a cabinet position, a minister for loneliness. And certainly within Canada, there have been various aspects of loneliness, particularly among seniors and various groups that have been studied. So Our motive in commissioning this survey was very much trying to get a more comprehensive look at the extent of the problem, and certainly we found it's very real and serious here in Canada as well.
Ray, let's get a little more specific about the survey itself. Individuals were put into 5 different categories. Tell me more about that.
So essentially, we measured 2 things. We measured loneliness and we measured isolation. So isolation is a measurement of how many people you interact with. So outside of the people you live with in your household, how often you talk to your neighbor? How often do you go to the theater? How often do you go to the library? Loneliness is your emotional feelings regarding a desiring to talk to others. So, for example, if you had a financial need, do you have someone that you'd be able to turn to lend you a small amount of money? Ironically, 1 in 3 Canadians don't. If you were to receive an emotional news, a call from the doctor regarding a diagnosis, do you know who you would call to talk to? 1 in 5 Canadians don't. And then what we did is we put together those who were both isolated and lonely on the one extreme, and those who were neither on the other, and then all of the different permutations with the average, of course, in the middle. And you get roughly 5 categories of Canadians. And then we started to look at the different characteristics of each of those groups.
Now, can you define what is meant by extreme isolation and loneliness?
So extreme isolation and loneliness are those people who are in both categories. They are both lonely and they are isolated. So these are the people who generally, what's interesting is there is no single characteristic which puts you into the group. You can be earning $100,000 and be in any of these 5 groups. You can be poor and be earning in any of these 5 groups. That said, those who were most likely to be on the negative side of the spectrum were younger Canadians. So there is a sense. Now, they tend to skew towards the feelings of loneliness. They have more contacts. They're a little less isolated, but they are feeling lonely. Whereas on the other side of it, older Canadians have less contacts, those 55 plus, but are more likely to be content and not having the cravings for the sort of contacts that they wish. But those who are on the extreme side have both and are in the most trouble.
So when it comes to maybe, let's say, millennials, is part of what's causing the isolation tied in with social media? People are spending a lot of time on Twitter, Instagram, as opposed to personal one-on-one interactions?
Our poll doesn't get far enough in terms of making the diagnosis. We can look at correlations. So, we highlighted on the negative side. What's interesting is on the positive side. Sometimes you can learn in terms of those who don't have it, what's unique about them. And there were 2 things that stood out: family and faith. They were hugely overrepresented in terms of being married with kids, and they were hugely overrepresented in terms of participating and regularly attending a community of worship. So on the positive side, those things are much less, to make you much less likely to be socially isolated.
And the negative side, maybe it is some of that social media as opposed to one-on-one interaction. Now, is it one particular age group, as I mentioned, the millennials, or is it widespread? Maybe seniors as well are feeling a lot of loneliness.
It is. Every group is in every category. So, while there are more of one than the other, there are no single factors that are identified as here is the, whether social media, as you mentioned, poverty, education. You can make distinctions and to say the more educated you are, the more likely you are to be here or there. But there are people with PhDs on the negative side of the spectrum as well.
Now, when someone suffers from loneliness, how does that really impact their lives? Do we see a lot more cases of depression, anxiety?
So obviously there are the mental health aspects of this, but there are very practical things. For example, I mentioned the fact of if you came into a financial crisis, do you know somebody who could loan you some money? 1 out of 3 don't. Well, maybe payday loans, that whole industry and some of the negative sides of that. Maybe that, this has something to do with with loneliness as well. So there are a host of social impacts. Certainly there's significant impacts in the health system as well. Significant mental health costs associated with this.
You know, it's interesting how you made mention earlier that some Canadians don't even know their neighbors. You know, I just bought a house recently here in Lethbridge, and the first thing I did the first couple of days, I went in, I was chatting with my neighbors, shaking their hands, and they said, you know what? The other neighbor that lived there for so many years, we didn't even get to know them. We didn't know their name. We didn't know anything about them. So what's stopping us from reaching out and getting to know our neighbors? Is it fear? Are we too busy?
It's interesting. 45% of Canadians have not spoken to their neighbor in the last month. So
not even to borrow a lawnmower?
I have no idea. There was no need for them apparently to talk to their neighbors, and yet we are having, you know, these widespread issues of loneliness. So it is interesting. You know, you're in Lethbridge, a community that's surrounded by a more rural network, and there is some difference between rural and urban on this. I think some of the geography in terms of a lot of our suburbs where we have our garage doors, we drive inside with our door opener, you perhaps wave, but you don't talk to your neighbor. You don't have porches that are big enough to sit on. So we live isolated lives in which we all exist with our own families, and a lot of the interaction that we need to really be human is missing from our lives.
So let's talk more about those social institutions which really help protect against isolation and loneliness. Like you mentioned earlier, family and faith. How important are they?
Well, they're very important. It's interesting when we ask the people who are lonely and what is it that you crave, the numbers were off the charts. In the 90% where I wish I had more time with family. That was overwhelming, the result. And you know, we can take a look at the history of the family unit, you know, divorce, family breakdown, all of these factors that really, you know, we're a generation in now of a lot of these social experiments. We have not had a complete life cycle yet of every generation having gone through where divorce is mainstream and common, and marriages break up with the frequency that they do in modern society. And I think we're now seeing that this isn't just a result of individual choice. It has consequences. It's interesting when you think of, you know, the promise of individualism is that you can be whoever you want. But for me to be who I want, I need people around me. I want a we life. I want a life with others, which means that I can't just think in terms of I need to think in terms of we. And yet we have been keep preaching that life is all about having what you want as an individual. And I think we've missed out on emphasizing the importance of the institutions to which we belong.
I understand that the frequency of prayer also plays a vital role. Tell me more about that.
Well, prayer is, it's interesting in the sense of prayer, and, you know, I can get theological and all the rest on that, but there is a sense in which when you are praying, you are making your needs known to God, but you're also hearing them yourself, even as you do that. And so there is something about that, I think, that process. I also think that the very act of prayer is an act of recognizing another, a transcendent, that I am not myself, but I live in relationship to others. If I see myself living in relationship to God, I'm also more likely to see myself relationship to of God's image bearers around whom I live.
Let's really dissect a person's education and their financial position and how it really impacts their loneliness, right?
Well, obviously, on the negative end, poverty does increase your likelihood to be on the negative side. Although there are lots of people who are in the lowest social economic bracket who are in the most positive side. So by no means is there a direct correlation. But obviously, financial need does, you know, create anxieties, creates fear in terms of talking to others, creates reluctance in terms of going out. Sometimes being with other people costs. So there's a whole host of things that just very practically carry forward in terms of economics. But the irony is neither education or economics were anywhere near the same as family and faith in terms of the strength of the correlation between the two.
You know, you live in Hamilton. I lived in Hamilton as well for many years. It has a very strong Portuguese and Italian community. And I know a lot of people in those communities, they're very interactive. They're always bringing family over, always chatting. I don't see a lot of loneliness. So do you think it's also tied in with culture, depending upon the culture we were raised in?
Absolutely. I think there is a sense in which, among immigrants, there is a sense among first generation immigrants, they need each other. They need each other to help. A poll we did with Angus Reid Institute last year looking at immigration, found that 50% of the immigrants in Canada had received material help from a faith community. We take a look at, we brought in all these Syrian refugees last year. You take a look at the difference a year later between those who were sponsored by faith communities versus those who were government sponsored. I don't have the number at my fingertips, but I saw something the other day, and I think it was you were 5 times more likely to be employed if you were brought in by a faith community than if you were supported by the government 1 year later.
How about other minority groups? Let's talk a bit about Blacks, Asian people. Did they feel more or less isolated?
The marginalized groups, physically handicapped, LGBT, some of those groups were among those. So the groups Indigenous, those whom, if I said marginalized groups in Canada and you create the list, most of them found themselves on the more isolated side of the equation. There was a disproportionate connection there. Again, the survey did not go as far, with the survey, we're able to describe, we're not able to make correlations or say this is because of that. We simply, given the tool, we're able to make some of these linkages to say they are certainly more likely to be in those groups.
Now, the survey revealed that 62% of Canadians wish family and friends would spend much more time with them. Do you have any suggestions as how we can change our culture to facilitate spending more time together?
Well, I think there is a sense of just, plan the family reunions, the birthday parties, a lot of those things that used to be part of everyday family life that brought families together on a regular basis. Part of it is, even size of families make a difference today. I grew up in a family with 3 siblings. There were 4 of us. Today, the average is much smaller than that. So there are many less opportunities if you only have birthdays and that. So, do things together. It's good for family, but it's also good for you.
So what advice would you give to parents who are raising their children to become a little more interactive in society? So they're not so socially awkward, perhaps, as they get older.
Participate in the community. Get involved in your local Rotary Club, your local ball team. Go to the library.
Your church, right?
Your church. Volunteer. There are lots of opportunities. There are lots of needs in the world. Think about how you can help others. And when you think about how you can help others, you'll end up overcoming a lot of the challenges that you're facing yourself as well.
Maybe helping out seniors as well, volunteering at some seniors' homes?
Absolutely. Certainly, one of the big issues that the poll identified, again, in a descriptive way, is the fact that a lot of seniors are living alone. And certainly, I think we both realize the fact from just our own knowledge of seniors networks, sometimes shoveling their walks or getting their groceries or taking them to a doctor becomes an increasing challenge, especially when, one spouse is gone and they're living alone. So adopt the senior on your street. Help them out. And it's amazing, I think, how much those sorts of activities can make a difference.
And think of all of the wonderful stories that seniors can share with us and the wisdom that they can impart on us as well, right?
Absolutely. No generation is isolated or has a monopoly on wisdom and insight. And in our age, when we're busy apologizing for everything previous generations did, it seems some days, I wonder whether or not we might not be wizened by listening to some of the stories, and perhaps there was a little more wisdom and context for some of the decisions than we give credit for.
Ray Pennings, the Executive Vice President of the Christian think tank Cardis, thanks a lot for joining me today from Hamilton, Ontario.
Thank you so much for having me.
On behalf of all of us here at BCN, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless. Have a great night.